Welcome back to the pre-learning module for Ship Safety Course Part 4. This module, Part 4, covers the International Convention on Loadlines, ICLL, signed in 1966 and amended with Protocol 1988 as indicated in red. This slide presents an overview of this module. This module begins with a brief explanation of ICLL 1966 and Protocol 1988 as follows. 4.3.1 Background 4.3.2 History of amendments to ICLL 1966 and Protocol 1988 4.1.3 Outlines of ICLL 1966 and Protocol 1988 4.3.1 Background Objectives of the ICLL. It has long been recognised that placing limitations on ships' drafts can contribute significantly to their safety. These limits are given in the form of freeboards. The main objective of the ICLL was to ensure the watertight integrity of ships' hulls below the freeboard deck by maintaining sufficient freeboard and safety seals. This slide shows a brief history of the Loadline Convention. In the 1860s, after Britain had lost many ships due to overloading, Samuel Plimsoll, a member of the British Parliament, advocated regulating the maximum safe draft, the Loadline. The British law made the Plimsoll line compulsory in 1876. In 1930, an international agreement on loadlines was reached, and the 1930 Loadline Convention was adopted, which entered into force in 1933. In 1966, another Loadline Convention held in London re-examined and amended the 1930 rules. The new Loadline regulations were adopted and came into force on 21 July 1968. Various amendments were also adopted, but they never came into force because they were not accepted by 2/3 of the Convention parties, the so-called Explicit amendment procedure. The 1988 Protocol, adopted in November 1988, entered into force on 3 February 2000. It harmonised the Convention's survey and certification requirements with the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, and the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, MARPOL 73-78 conventions. The 1988 Protocol also revised certain regulations in the technical ICLL annexes and introduced the tacit amendment procedure, through which adopted amendments enter into force 6 months after the deemed date of acceptance, unless they are explicitly rejected by 1/3 of the parties. The date from adoption to deemed acceptance is usually 2 years. This slide discusses the Derbyshire. At 91,655 gross tonnage, the 4-year-old Derbyshire was the largest British ship ever lost at sea. The Derbyshire was an all-bulk oil combination carrier, built and registered in 1976. The ship sank on 9 September 1980 during Typhoon Orchid, south of Japan. All 42 crew members and 2 family members on board were killed. The Derbyshire never issued a Mayday distress message. The search was called off after 6 days, when no trace of the vessel was found, and it was declared lost. However, after its sister ship, the Kowloon Bridge, sank off the Ireland coast, relatives of the Derbyshire's victims reopened that investigation with financial support from the Seafarers' Union. Ultimately, investigators determined that waves crashing over the front of the ship had sheared the covers off the small ventilation pipes near the bow. Seawater entered through the pipes into the ship's forward section, causing the bow to slowly ride lower and lower in the water. Eventually, the bow was completely exposed to the full force of the rough waves. The massive hatch on the first cargo hold buckled inward, filling the hold with hundreds of tons of water in moments. As the ship started to sink, the second and third hatches also failed, dragging the ship underwater. The investigation into the cause of the Derbyshire's loss led directly to amendments to the ICLL and the SOLAS Convention's Chapter 12, additional safety measures for bulk carriers, to strengthen ships' forward construction and the closing appliances of hatch covers, ventilators, etc. 4.3.3 Structure of the Convention and the 1988 Protocol. The 1966 ICLL was absorbed and amended by the 1988 Protocol. The articles of ICLL 66 contained in Annex A of Protocol 88 included provisions on general obligations, applications, amendment procedures, surveys, load line inspection and marking, certification, and prohibitions on load mark submersion, among others. Annex B of ICLL 6688 consists of 3 annexes: 1, 2, and 3. The regulations in Annex B cover the potential hazards posed by different zones and different seasons. The technical annexes include several additional safety measures for doors, ports, hatchways, and other items. Ships intended for the carriage of timber deck cargo are allowed a smaller freeboard, as the deck cargo provides protection against waves. This slide shows a typical survey schedule. A ship shall be subjected to the survey specified below. An initial survey, IS, before the ship is put in service, which shall include a complete inspection of its structure and equipment to issue the International Loadline certificate. A renewal survey, RS, at intervals specified by the administration, but not to exceed 5 years. An annual survey, AS, within 3 months, before or after each anniversary date of the certificate. This slide shows the most essential rule of the Convention. The appropriate load lines shall not be submerged at any time when the ship is put to sea, during the voyage or on arrival. However, when a ship is in fresh water or departs from a sheltered port, deeper loading is permitted corresponding to the weight of fuel and all other materials required for consumption between the point of departure and the sea. This slide shows the load line mark and other associated lines. The lines must be painted to be plainly visible and permanently marked. The freeboard is essentially determined by the length of the ship. The value of the freeboard is corrected in accordance with the individual features of the ship's hull, such as its shear, superstructures, trunks, and so on. This chart indicates the zones and areas provided in Annex 2 and determined by meteorological criteria. Summer zone, not more than 10% winds of force 8 Beaufort, 34 knots or more. Tropical zones, not more than 1% winds of force 8 Beaufort or more. Seasonal zones and areas change category seasonally, for example from a summer zone to a tropical zone. A ship has to comply with the requirements applicable to that ship in the zones and areas described in Annex 2. This slide shows the requirements for doors of enclosed superstructures. All access openings in bulkheads at ends of enclosed superstructures must be fitted with doors that are permanently and strongly attached to the bulkhead. The means for securing weathertight shall consist of gaskets and clamping devices or some other equivalents. The height of the sills of access openings shall be at least 380 mm, 15 inches, above the deck. This slide shows the requirements for ventilators and air pipes. Both need a minimum coaming height in accordance with its position. The minimum coaming height for a ventilator fitted in position 1 is 900 mm. For position 2, the minimum coaming height is 760 mm. The 2 positions are defined in the next slide, as are the measurements for coaming height. Air pipes need to have automatic closing devices. Here, when seawater covers the air pipe, the ball inside the closing device floats, closing the opening and preventing seawater from getting inside. This slide provides the definitions for position 1 and position 2. Position 1 is defined as follows: upon exposed freeboard and raised quarterdecks, and upon exposed superstructure decks situated forward of a point located a quarter of the ship's length from the forward perpendicular, as indicated in the slide. Meanwhile, position 2 is defined as upon exposed superstructure decks situated abaft a quarter of the ship's length from the forward of perpendicular, as indicated in the slide. According to 2003 amendments to the Convention, upon exposed superstructure decks situated forward of a point located a quarter of the ship's length is also treated to be position 2, in case exposed superstructure decks are located at least 2 standard heights of superstructure above the freeboard deck. The 2003 amendment applies to ships constructed on or after 1 January 2005. This slide shows the requirements for steel cargo hatch covers. The minimum coaming height is 600 mm in position 1 and 450 mm in position 2. The minimum thickness of the hatch cover plate is 6 mm. This slide shows the minimum sill height of openings. The blue indicates openings to the companionways, the green indicates openings to the engine room, and the white indicates openings to the castles. The sill height must be 600 mm in position 1 and 380 mm in position 2. Regarding the protection of the crew, guardrails or bulwarks need to be fitted around all exposed decks. The minimum height from the deck shall be 1 metre. If the height would interfere with normal operations, the height requirement can be waived by the administration. Guardrails fitted on superstructure and freeboard decks need to have at least 3 courses, as indicated in the slide. Regarding the means for safe passage of crew, each ship type needs to be provided with at least one of the means for the safe passage of crew prescribed by Regulation 25.1, as indicated in this slide. Thank you for your kind attention. This concludes Part 4 of this module.